In October of 1982, in a hotel room in Los Angeles, a man sat down across a table from someone he believed was a cocaine trafficker. On the table between them was a suitcase. Inside that suitcase, nearly 60 pounds of cocaine. Worth, at street value, approximately $24 million. The man sitting across the table picked up one of the packages. He looked at it. And then he said, quietly and clearly, to the person across from him, "It's better than gold." That man was John Zachary DeLorean, former vice president of General Motors, creator of the Pontiac GTO, the most celebrated automotive executive of his generation. He was also, at that precise moment, being filmed by the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The camera capturing that exchange would become the centerpiece of one of the most sensational criminal trials in American history. But before the hotel room, before the suitcase, before the FBI, there was a car. A car with gull-wing doors and a stainless steel body that looked like nothing Detroit had ever produced. A car that was built, against all logic, in one of the most violent cities in Europe. A car that was meant to save a company, and instead became the symbol of one of the most spectacular collapses in automotive history. This is the story of John DeLorean. And it is, depending on how you look at it, either a story about a man who was destroyed by the system he tried to escape, or a story about a man who destroyed himself. To understand what John DeLorean became, you first have to understand what John DeLorean was. In the 1960s, General Motors was not merely the largest automobile manufacturer in the world. It was, by most measures, the largest corporation in the world. It employed nearly 900,000 people. Its annual revenue exceeded that of most sovereign nations. Its headquarters in Detroit was the center of the industrial universe. And inside that universe, John DeLorean was a rising star of unusual brightness. He had joined GM's Pontiac division in 1956, and within a decade he had done something that the corporate culture of General Motors was specifically designed to prevent. He had broken the rules, and been rewarded for it. In 1964, against explicit GM policy limiting engine displacement in midsize cars, DeLorean and his team quietly fitted a full-size V8 engine into the intermediate Pontiac Tempest body. They called it an option package. They priced it aggressively. And they released it to a market that had no idea it wanted exactly this. The result was the Pontiac GTO. The car that, more than any other single model, created the American muscle car segment. DeLorean was 38 years old when it launched. He wore his hair longer than GM executives were supposed to. He dated actresses. He drove fast. He spoke in a way that suggested he found corporate protocol mildly amusing rather than binding. General Motors, characteristically, responded to his success by promoting him. By 1969, he was the youngest division head in GM history, running the Chevrolet division, 130,000 employees, the single largest division of the world's largest company. By the early 1970s, he was widely considered the front-runner to become the next president of General Motors. He was, by every conventional measure, exactly where a man of his talent and ambition was supposed to be. And he hated it. Not the work. Not the cars. The institution. He found General Motors increasingly stifling, a place where the machine of corporate bureaucracy had become more important than the product it was supposed to produce. Where decisions were made by committees, approved by other committees, and reviewed by additional committees before arriving, drained of originality, at the production line. He was also, by his own later account, deeply uncomfortable with certain aspects of GM's corporate culture, the conformity it demanded, the way it expected its senior executives to present themselves, to behave, to think. In April of 1973, John DeLorean resigned from General Motors. He moved to New York. He wrote a book critical of GM's internal culture. He married Christina Ferrar, one of the most prominent fashion models in the United States. He gave interviews. He appeared on television. And, in the background, quietly and with total seriousness, he began developing the car he had always wanted to build. Not a muscle car. Not a corporate product engineered by committee. His sports car. Built his way, under his name. The car DeLorean envisioned was genuinely revolutionary in its conception. He hired Giorgetto Giugiaro, the Italian designer responsible for some of the most celebrated automotive shapes of the 20th century, to design the body. The result was a low, wedge-shaped sports car with gull-wing doors that opened vertically, like the wings of a bird in flight. The exterior would be unpainted stainless steel. Not silver paint, not metallic finish. Actual stainless steel panels, brushed and raw, reflecting the world around it with a coolness that no other production car had ever possessed or attempted. The engine would be rear-mounted, over the drive wheels. The frame would use a backbone chassis of advanced composite construction. The car would be safe, practical, and visually unlike anything on the road. What DeLorean needed, beyond the design, was money. And a place to build it. The money came from a combination of investor capital, dealer deposits, and, most significantly, the British government. The British government, under considerable political pressure to reduce unemployment in Northern Ireland, offered DeLorean a package of grants and loans ultimately worth approximately $150 million, to build his factory in Dunmurry, on the outskirts of Belfast. This was 1978. Belfast was, at that moment, in the middle of the Troubles. The Irish Republican Army was active. Bombings were regular occurrences. The British Army maintained a visible armed presence on the streets. Businesses were reluctant to invest. Workers were desperate for employment. DeLorean built his factory there anyway. He hired workers who had never built cars before, welders, assembly workers, people who had previously worked in linen mills and shipyards. He trained them from nothing. He told the press that he was bringing economic hope to one of the most damaged communities in Europe. It was not entirely cynical. DeLorean believed in the project with a sincerity that was, depending on your perspective, either admirable or delusional. It was also, from a purely practical standpoint, an extraordinary location in which to build a luxury sports car for the American market. The supply chains were non-existent. The infrastructure was damaged. The political environment made international business partners nervous. Every component had to be shipped in. Every finished car had to be shipped out. The first DMC-12 rolled off the Dunmurry production line in January of 1981. 2 years behind the original schedule. The car that emerged was not quite the car that had been designed. The Giugiaro body survived largely intact. The gull-wing doors worked. The stainless steel body was genuinely remarkable. But the backbone chassis of advanced composite construction had been replaced, late in development, with a conventional steel chassis from Lotus, which had been contracted to assist with engineering. The engine was a modest Peugeot Renault Volvo V6 producing 130 horsepower. Not enough, really, to move a car weighing nearly 1,200 kilograms with the authority the styling suggested. And the American market that DeLorean was about to enter had changed dramatically since he had first conceived the project. The oil crisis of 1979 had sent fuel prices sharply upward and consumer confidence sharply downward. The recession of 1981 and 1982 hit the luxury and sports car segments with particular force. Buyers who might have paid $25,000 for a DeLorean in a strong economy were reconsidering every discretionary purchase. The car arrived late, underpowered. It arrived into a recession. And it arrived with manufacturing quality issues that early reviewers noted with a care that fell just short of kindness. DeLorean Motor Company needed a miracle. What it got was a DEA informant named James Hoffman. By the summer of 1982, DeLorean Motor Company was in terminal financial difficulty. The British government, which had been providing ongoing support, was losing patience. The factory in Dunmurry was producing cars faster than they were being sold. Inventory was accumulating. The company had, by various accounts, less than 6 weeks of operating cash remaining. DeLorean was making increasingly frantic calls to potential investors. He was pursuing deals in the Middle East, in Europe, in America. He needed, by his own estimate, somewhere between $40 and $60 million to survive long enough for the market to recover. James Hoffman was a convicted drug smuggler who had become an informant for the Drug Enforcement Administration. He was also, by circumstance, DeLorean's neighbor in the Palma Valley area of Southern California. Hoffman, working with DEA handlers, approached DeLorean with a proposition. He knew people, he said, who had money to invest. Large amounts of money. Money that needed, let us say, a legitimate business context in which to be placed. DeLorean, by his own later account, understood from the beginning that the conversation was moving towards something connected to drug trafficking. He claimed, also by his later account, that he believed he was being set up, that Hoffman was working for law enforcement, and that he continued the conversations in order to gather evidence that he could take to the authorities. The FBI, which had joined the investigation alongside the DEA, was running what would later be described by DeLorean's defense attorneys as one of the most aggressive undercover operations in the history of American federal law enforcement. Over the course of several months, through a series of recorded meetings, DeLorean was drawn deeper into discussions about a proposed cocaine transaction. The conversations were filmed. The evidence was extensive. The FBI believed it had an airtight case. On October 19, 1982, the same day DeLorean Motor Company went into receivership in Belfast, John DeLorean arrived at the Sheraton Grand Hotel in Los Angeles. He sat down with the man he believed was a drug trafficker. The suitcase was opened. The FBI cameras were running. "It's better than gold," DeLorean said, holding the package of cocaine. Federal agents entered the room. John DeLorean was placed under arrest. The footage was leaked to the press within hours. It played on every television network. The image of America's most celebrated automotive entrepreneur, the man who had defied Detroit, built a stainless steel sports car in Belfast, married a supermodel, holding a brick of cocaine in a hotel room was the kind of story that absorbed the country's complete attention. In Belfast, the consequences were immediate and brutal. The factory in Dunmurry employed 2,600 people. Many of them had no alternative employment in a city where unemployment was already catastrophic. They had built over 9,000 cars, they had learned a trade from nothing. Many of them believed in the project. The receivers moved in. The production line stopped. The workers went home. The British government, which had invested the equivalent of over £300 million, wrote off the majority of the loss. DeLorean himself, out on bail, faced a federal trial on drug trafficking charges that carried a potential sentence of 64 years. His personal assets were frozen. His marriage, which had already been under considerable strain, collapsed. Christina Ferrar filed for divorce. He had, in the span of approximately 48 hours, lost his company, his factory, his freedom, his marriage, and his reputation. But DeLorean had one resource remaining that the government had not been able to freeze. He had Howard Weitzman. Howard Weitzman was one of the most accomplished criminal defense attorneys in the United States. And when Weitzman examined the evidence the government had assembled, the recorded conversations, the surveillance footage, the chain of contacts leading from Hoffman to the DEA to the FBI, he saw something that the prosecution had not adequately considered. The question was not whether John DeLorean had been in that hotel room. The question was who had put him there, and why. The trial of John DeLorean began in April of 1984 in the Federal District Court of Los Angeles. It ran for 4 months. The prosecution presented its case with the confidence of a team that believed the videotape was sufficient. The tape existed. DeLorean's voice was on it. His words were on it. What more, the government argued, did a jury need? Weitzman's defense was built on a single, precise legal doctrine. Entrapment. Entrapment, in American law, is not simply the claim that law enforcement was involved in the crime. It is a specific argument that law enforcement induced a person to commit a crime they would not otherwise have committed, through persistent pressure, manipulation, or exploitation of a particular vulnerability. Weitzman intended to demonstrate that James Hoffman, the DEA informant who had initiated contact with DeLorean, had done exactly that. He called witnesses who testified to the desperation of DeLorean's financial situation in the summer of 1982. Not to excuse his conduct, but to establish the context in which Hoffman had approached him. A man drowning will grab at any rope, Weitzman argued. Hoffman had dangled the rope. The government had held the other end. Hoffman himself proved to be a damaging witness for the prosecution. Under cross-examination, his credibility was systematically dismantled. His history of criminal activity was established. The financial arrangements between himself and the DEA were revealed, arrangements that, Weitzman suggested, gave Hoffman a direct personal incentive to manufacture a criminal case rather than simply report on one. The conduct of the investigation was examined in detail. The number of recorded contacts. The persistence with which DeLorean had been pursued. The degree to which government agents had driven the development of the transaction rather than merely observing it. On August 16, 1984, the jury returned its verdict. Not guilty. On all 8 counts. The courtroom erupted. DeLorean embraced his attorneys. He wept. He was 59 years old, and for the first time in nearly 2 years, he was a free man not merely on bail but in fact. Outside the courthouse, speaking to the assembled press, DeLorean was characteristically composed. "I am extremely grateful," he said. "Justice has been done." The verdict was not a declaration of innocence in the moral sense. The jury had not concluded that DeLorean had gone to that hotel room with pure intentions. They had concluded that the government's conduct in arranging his presence there was sufficiently improper to render the prosecution unjust. It was a distinction that would follow John DeLorean for the rest of his life. In 1985, 1 year after DeLorean's acquittal, a film was released that would do something no amount of press coverage or legal vindication could have achieved. Back to the Future made the DMC-12 immortal. The decision by director Robert Zemeckis and producer Steven Spielberg to use the DeLorean as the time machine in their film was not, initially, inevitable. Other vehicles had been considered. The DeLorean was chosen, in part, precisely because of its visual extraordinariness, the gull-wing doors, the stainless steel body, the sense that it had arrived from somewhere other than a conventional production line. The car that had been a commercial failure, a financial catastrophe, and a symbol of one man's spectacular fall became the most beloved movie vehicle in American cinema history. 11 years of production. 9,232 cars built. A company that employed 2,600 people for less than 2 years before collapsing completely. By any conventional measure, the DeLorean Motor Company was a failure. And yet, the DMC-12 is one of the most recognizable automobiles ever produced. Its value has increased steadily for 3 decades. Specialists in Ohio and Texas maintain, restore, and service them for an ownership community that is, if anything, more passionate now than at any point during the car's actual production. John DeLorean himself spent the years after the trial in a combination of attempted business ventures and quiet retirement. He filed for personal bankruptcy in 1999. He suffered a stroke in 2005. He died in March of that year, in Summit, New Jersey, at the age of 80. He never stopped talking about building another car. The question that the DeLorean story never quite resolves, and perhaps was never meant to, is the simplest one. Was he a visionary brought down by the institutions he had spent his career defying? Or was he a man of real talent and real ethical flexibility who made decisions under pressure that no amount of FBI encouragement fully explains? The jury acquitted him. History has not entirely done the same. But every time those gull-wing doors swing upward, every time the stainless steel body catches the light in a way that no other car quite manages, the argument for the visionary feels, for a moment, entirely convincing. The car was real. What it cost to build it, and what it cost the man who built it, is a question you can answer differently depending on which part of the story you choose to remember. John DeLorean chose, to the end, to remember the car. Given what the car became, perhaps that was the right choice.